Danny, I want to talk a little bit about your legacy at the church. And you have such a wide legacy from your leadership to vision. But I would say most people that know you and that know the church go back to your heart for the nations and go back to your heart for missions. What was it was there a catalyst moment, or are there things that you did as a pastor to instill within your people to think beyond themselves, even beyond their church, to have a heart for missions?
If I give you the catalyst story, but really, really quick. The catalyst story is when I became pastor at Shays Mountain Baptist Church. We were in Vestavia, which was an area that pretty well had already been built up, and most of the demographics were moving south. But yet we were a large church, had great people, great resources, and I remember just coming before the Lord and saying, okay, so why do you have this church on this hill? Why have you had Charles Carter lead it effectively all these years and the men that came before him, just to sit here and let demographics rule and us just slowly get less and less? And it's when God just placed on my heart that says, well, let's kind of be the shining light. And he gave us the Matthew 5 passage about being a light on a hill and taking these resources and to be useful to go into the world. But I didn't know how to do that until a few years in. There was a company called Global Focus, and I got connected with them. I saw what they did in missions, attended one conference. I went to the first session, walked up to the founder, Larry Reeser, and I said, you don't know me, I don't know you. I know there's more that's going to happen the next days, but from what I saw Wednesday night, I want that. Can we partner? We did, and then for the next 20 years, it was all about personalization of missions and making it more than just missionaries that you would see on a prayer card, but yet those that you would engage into and get to know them and pour your life in, and y'all walk together and do ministry together. So it was the personalization of missions that attracted me. And from that point, it began, you just had to begin to get your church to come alongside. And getting the church to come alongside, and I think that was one of the things that you had even asked me. You said, well, how do you get your church to get this mission-minded? Well, it starts with the pastor. It's got to be in your heart. If it's not in your heart, if it's not a priority for you, it won't be a priority for your congregation. So I would think that if you've got a desire to be mission-minded, it's just you getting before the Lord and saying, you know what, I've got to get a heart. And then at the same time, you want to talk to your people about getting outside the walls of the church. And this usually happens with your preaching. And from the pulpit, you make it an issue to talk about how do we get outside the walls of the church. Now, I'm just going to throw you about 3 passages that you may want to write down. You can think through and say, okay, if I'm going to try to do that, what would I do? Well, I would look at Jesus' 2 commissions. I'd look at Matthew 28, 19 through 20, and that is the depth, okay? And this is the depth. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go, make disciples. We're to baptize. We're to teach. You preach that. This is what we're called to do. You go to Acts 1:8, and it's the extent of his commission. And the extent is, okay, we're doing Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. So now all of a sudden I have this. I would also go to Matthew 9, 35 through 38 and encourage my people to see people as Jesus saw them. And in that passage of scripture, it says he looked out over the people and he had compassion for them, and they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so, you look out in our world, it's a lot of people that look like sheep without a shepherd. But then, through those same eyes, he says that the harvest is ripe. So what Jesus saw was shepherdless people, but he also saw a harvest that was ripe. And then, what did he do? He says, you need to pray to the Lord of the harvest. So once you begin to get your people thinking about it, and say, let's begin to pray. And what are we praying? We're praying that God will send people out. Now, there is a lot of humor in the Bible. I love this. At the end of chapter 9, he says, you need to pray. You need to pray that we send out people to the harvest. Go to chapter 10, and what does he do? Jesus sends them out. So the same ones that were praying, he shoulder tapped them and said, let's go. You're going to go. And that's, for us, we have a thing we call live sent. And that means your own go. You serve wherever God wants you to serve, whenever he wants you to serve. And so I've got to be ready. But if I can see people like Jesus sees them. And I would tell our people, if Jesus was here today and he walked around our community, he would not see rich, poor, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, educated, uneducated, Auburn, Alabama. You know what he'd see? Shepherdless sheep and a ripened harvest. And that's the eyes that we have to have. And if we have that, then we go with, okay, well, where do we go? Well, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the world, and then begin to stretch it from there.
I was a college student that was an intern at Shades Mountain when God laid this vision upon Danny's heart, and to see the transformation of the church. It truly did stem from your leadership and from your passion that was there and the preaching that you laid out before the people. You are clearly an extrovert. You're outgoing. And some of us in ministry, I think we would admit, and I'll be the first to admit, that maybe we struggle finding friendships or finding identity outside of the church, and finding ways to use, whether it's our hobby or our skill set or what the Lord has given us, to find a way to have influence outside of those that are inside of our walls. What are some things that maybe you've done, or how have you found opportunities to leverage who God made you to continue to live sent, as you say?
And I love the way you phrase that, to leverage how God made you, because everyone, is created different, got their own interest. For me, spending 8.5 years in the business world, and I was in sales training and sales management, I just had a love. I love the business world. And so I wanted to be able to reach business people. So we started a lunch. And in fact, we started it when I was pastor in Ruston, and then we carried it over when I came to Birmingham, and we just called it Power Lunch. And it was a monthly luncheon that we would hold and invite the business community to come and be a part of it. And we would promise them, we'll give you a great meal, and it was only like $5, but it was meat, 2 vegetables, dessert, whole bit. It was incredible. And we promise that you'll be out in 1 hour. And we'll have a handout for you. I'll give about a 22-minute leadership talk, and we're in, we're out, we'll fellowship, and also use it as a time for networking. And we had people that would come to this lunch who didn't have a job. And if I knew them well, I even brought one up. There was a young girl that graduated from Auburn, and she was saying, hey, I'm graduating, I'm kind of looking for a job. I had her come up, say a couple of words. She had 3 people give her a business card by the time that she left, and she got a job. So it was all worth it. So we did this every month, and the attendance we would have is half the people that showed up were not even members of our church. And we invited our church to come, but there were people outside in the community. And I could rub shoulders with these guys and gals because 8.5 years I was doing what they were doing. And I love leadership, and so I was able to give leadership lessons. And just, you have no idea what kind of impact you can have. I had a person come up to me after I retired, and we did Power Lunch we did 20 years. And there's a guy came up to me, he says, I've got every handout. Okay, every handout. So this is, sometimes we did 8, sometimes 10 times a year. You multiply that over 20, it's like 200. And I've got all these leadership lessons, and I keep them, and I pull them out, and I use them every so often in my business. Well, that's an impact, and it's another impact because they would take what we taught, meet with their teams at their work, and share. And every one of them had a spiritual element to them. So it's kind of had some deeper roots. That worked for me because that's really my passion. So I had 2 passions. Passion was leadership, and the other passion was Auburn football, okay? I graduated from Auburn and love that. And there's a group of old guys that get together at the Red Lobster in Vestavia Hills every Monday. Now, I love you because we were supposed to meet this Monday, and wouldn't we have fun talk about that collapse that we had on Saturday? And just a bunch of crotchety old guys, some of them are former football players, and we have lunch, and we talk for about an hour and a half, just Auburn stuff. And I started coming to that, and they elevated me to the front table. If you can sit on the front table, that's big news. And I'm the guy that does the prayer every day because I'm trained. I'm a professional. And so they turn it to me to pray, and then ask to pray for certain things. And it's like I'm the spiritual guru of this gruff old guys group. But I love it. And it's great. And it's something outside the church that I've been doing for the last couple of years. So just find those things where your passion is.
Well, and Danny, as someone who knows you, that served under you, and that has watched you from afar, I think one of the reasons that you've been so successful in ministry is because you're authentic. That you are the same person that when you were on the platform, that you were in staff meeting, that you are at Red Lobster. I've never seen you at a football game, so I can't verify that. But your authenticity is truly, and I think that's what we have seen has been missing, sadly, in so many leaders in the church today. Let's talk a little bit about, you were at Shades Mountain for 24 and a half years. And so you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot of transitions in ministry. Can you share specifically maybe in the last 5 years, how did ministry transition or change for you than maybe in the first half, the first 20 years or so? What's different, or how did you have to transition your leadership in ministry?
Yeah, that was hard. I kept trying to go back and try to figure out the 5 to 10 years ranges, and probably the things that came to my mind first of all is what most of you would know, and I would look at it maybe from my preaching that our culture is more and more biblically illiterate. And so you can't just throw something out of Scripture and expect people to know that particular story or that particular event. And so you've got to kind of drill down a little bit deeper, be a little bit more explanatory of what this means, what this story, when I set things up. And that's been a challenge. Political correctness, has gotten really stricter and stricter. And you just have to be so careful with your words. Everything's on tape, everything's video, things can go out on social media, and you just have to be so careful. You never want to compromise the truth, but I really have to watch my words, and so do you. There were times in the past before everything was digital where you could just do a throw-off line, just something to kind of be funny. And you can't do that because that's one line that'll get taken and sent out of context. So I think a lot of that has made me have to hone it down as a preacher. And then the other thing is, and this has just continued, people's lives get busier and busier. Now, I know we went through COVID and everyone sort of brought the family in and we're going to hang around the house. Now, once most of the COVID fears, as they dissipate, now all of a sudden people are starting to fall back into, hey, we got to go here, there. But that busyness, and people have so many options, it just means you got to be really strategic when you're planning events, because people have got a lot of choices out there, and whatever you plan as a major event better be spot on in order for people to attend.
No doubt. Danny, in your time in ministry, what would you say, and I can only ask this question now because you're not a pastor, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges or obstacles that you had to face? And that could be inside the church or outside the church that maybe caught you by surprise, or that that pastors are struggling with today.
It's those young interns over there. So they were such a challenge. And Jay Watson, that was another challenge. So, I thought about that. That's really a great question when you think about your biggest obstacle. And I thought through this, and I think one of the biggest obstacles that I had as a pastor is that in a church is a church thinking too highly or too lowly of themselves. If a church thinks too highly of themselves, they will be resistant to change because they think we're doing everything right, and they'll be resistant to change. If a church feels too lowly about themselves, they will be resistant to challenge. And so some churches say, I'm just fill in the blank. I'm just a country church. I'm just a small church. I'm just a blue-collar church. I'm just an older church. Whatever, you fill that in. And then all of a sudden, they will be resistant to the next challenge. And that's an obstacle that every pastor, I think, has to deal with. And so you have to figure out where your church is and whether you've got to be one that really pushes the change or whether you're the one that really pushes the challenge on that. That to me has been it. And the only other thing I would say is the biggest obstacle is establishing priorities. Priorities in your ministry and priorities in your family. The thing about ministry is everything is important. I mean, everything's important. No matter, usually almost anything that comes to you has a connection to somebody's life. And then there's going to be eternal ramifications at times. And so how do you juggle those priorities to know what is most important, what do I put my time to, and what do I not put my time to? And then the church, no matter what size it is, can overwhelm you to a point to where your wife and your kids are secondary. And then you find out that you're losing your family. and you lose your family, you lose your ministry. And so sometimes I'm there trying to figure that out. The thing that's always stayed with me is when I worked with South Central Bell, which became AT&T. There was a divestiture that took place, and when the divestiture took place, it was confusion for that first year. And I remember being as a sales manager, we would go out, we'd sell a product, we couldn't get it connected with the folks who were supposed to deliver the product. The ordering system was all screwed up. I mean, there were so many things, and we were upset. And so they called a meeting for all the leaders to come together of our big region, and our vice president was there. And man, we were loaded for bear. We had all our stuff written down that we were going to complain about. The administrative policies weren't working. And the VP stood up and he said, in your position, you juggle a lot of balls. And there are a lot of things that you have up in the air. And he says, and some balls may drop, but there's one ball that never drops, and that's results. Well, that nipped in the bud any questions that we had because he really didn't care. He just says, get the results. And I think about that in my life and in my ministry. I'm juggling a lot of balls, but you see, there's one that I cannot drop because it's made of glass and it can shatter, and that's my family. And so however I'm juggling these balls, I have got to make certain that I am not dropping my family. And that's just a challenge that everyone has to work out. And no matter what size church you're in, it is a challenge.
No doubt. I hope that every one of us wrote that down and seared that in our hearts, because it's easy to say. It's hard to live out in the midst of the moment, in the midst of the pressures. That you said everything's important, but will we keep in mind what's the most important? Buddy Champion, who was my pastor for many years, he told me when I left First Baptist Trustful to come here, he said, there's going to come a day that you're going to leave First Baptist Decatur. He said, you're going to retire there, you're going to go somewhere else. And he said, when that day comes, they're going to have a celebration for you. They'll give you a book or something that they'll give you, and you're going to get in that. I had a Honda Accord, and you're going to drive away with your wife and your kids, and the next day they're going to start looking for another pastor. But that your wife will never have another husband, your kids will never have another dad, and you live every day of your ministry remembering that. And that's always been something I've tried to remember. And again, it's easy to know, it's hard to live out, but to put your family first.
Ministry just moves so fast, and it's like a tsunami at times, and you're caught up in it, and then you're kind of going, and all of a sudden you look back around, and 3 weeks just passed, and I really haven't spent much time with my wife and kids, and then it can easily happen.
So going along those lines, as you look back on your ministry, and we do have a lot of, whether they're student pastors or younger pastors, some that are in seminary, what would Danny Wood today tell 35-year-old Danny if you were to look back?
Run. Man, how good was that business world? That was incredible. No. He'd say, strap in, we got a great ride over here. I think the things that I would do would be pray more. You always hear people say this, but it really is true. It's so easy for us to want to do it in our strength and look at my calendar and the time I've got. But God does amazing things through prayer. And so I wrote down I would pray more. The second thing is I would learn to discern the motives of those speaking into your life. Say that one more time. Learn to discern the motives of those speaking into your life. Every person who wants to speak into your life does not have the purest motives. And as if I was being told as a 35-year-old, I would want to know that and want to learn and have the wisdom to know who to listen to and who not. And I would also remind you that it is God's church, and it is bigger than one or two people or families. So don't fret about those who leave, but focus on ministering to and developing those who have stayed. And it's easy for us to fret about the one or two that leaves. It just rips our heart out, and all of a sudden we get off focus where instead of fretting, you need to focus, because what God said is, okay, there's a couple that are gone, but look what I've got you. This is it. This is who you pastor. This is your team. It's like the movie Hoosiers. This is your team. This is who you support. And so God has put you there for that group. So your church will be bigger than that. I have learned that, and I've had my disappointments. I've had people rip my heart out that left our church that I just couldn't believe. There were times when someone left, and I thought, oh, how are we going to even operate? How are we going to make it? And God has been so faithful. And he has others step up or brings new people in or just makes an adjustment of a vision. But, hey, just realize it's God's church and it's not yours.
I don't think Danny's speaking to any of us, right? That doesn't relate to any of us that are going through that, to know that pain and that heartache, and to focus on the negative instead of the positive, what God's doing through you. Danny, unfortunately, conflict, it's something that most of us, and I would say you're sick if you enjoy it, right? So we don't enjoy it, but many of us feel ill-prepared when conflict arises. How did you handle conflict, whether it was within your own team, your staff, or just within certain church members?
Yeah, I'm like you. I don't love conflict, but when it comes, you need to do Barney Fife, and you need to nip it in the bud. You can't let it drag on. You deal with it, you don't duck it. And so oftentimes we just want to let it slide by, but you can't. So whenever there is conflict, you need to address it. And if it's with an individual, whether it be a church member or a staff member, you just got to go and bite the bullet and bring them in and let's talk about it. And when you talk about it, the first thing you want to do is make certain that we agree with what the conflict is. Don't just assume that they know what it is. Make sure you verbalize what it is, talk about it, and then see if there's a direction that you can take to make this thing right. And once you've talked about it, then you're going to feel so much better, because either you're both going to get on the same page and say, we can continue on, or you may begin to see that maybe this thing isn't going to work. And there may have to be a change somewhere. That person may need to leave the church, or that staff member may need to be looking for something else, because maybe we're just not on the same page. And if it's something that you're a little nervous, could be toxic, bring in a third person to sit with you, maybe another ministerial staff member or a chairman of deacons, and just say, hey, I just want to make sure that I've got this person here, because I just want to make sure we're all hearing the same thing and saying the same thing. So that's what I've done in the past.
Danny, along with conflict, I'm going to skip to the next question there. A lot of ministers struggle with whether it's depression or even just discouragement. In fact, one Lifeway study said that 70% of pastors constantly fight depression, and 50% of pastors feel so discouraged that they would leave the ministry if they could, but they have no other way of making a living. What are some positive ways or healthy ways that you found to deal with frustrations and even disappointments in ministry? I wrote some of these down, dealing with frustrations, disappointments. I'm going to tell you this. Number one, exercise relieves stress. Exercise relieves stress. There's something about the way our bodies are made that physically, when we stretch it out from an exercise standpoint, it helps our body to be able to deal with other stresses that come in. So I would just tell you, for me, I became a runner back 15 years or so ago. And you go out for a run, go work out, go play ball, go do something, some kind of exercise to get those frustrations out, okay? That's number one. Number two, you need to have a confidant, somebody you can confide in. And, for me, it was really my wife. And we've got a relationship where we can do that, where I can share with her anything. And for some, it may be better to find another friend in ministry or a friend that's outside of ministry. But you've got to have somebody that you can talk to, and preferably somebody that can understand the situation that you're in. Three, and it's not in any particular order, you need to pray and pour it out to the Lord. This is not something that you just want to hang on to and tell God, I know you don't want me to bother you with this. But when you get on your knees before God, as you're reading Scripture and you're praying, God at times will point out some things and say, Danny, the reason you're so frustrated is because there's something in your own life that is triggering some of this. So
Lord, show me if there's something about me. But then, Lord, if it's this other person, give me the strength to be able to go beyond this and get over this obstacle. Number 4 is, listen, when you get frustrated and you get disappointed, go take time and get with your family. Go do something fun as a family. And just take your mind off of it, and don't be some sourpuss with them. Oh, great, Dad's taking us out again. He's all depressed. And let's somebody grab Dad and send him over here. Man, no. Yeah, be the fun guy. Okay, hey, it's your family. Y'all just have some fun and do something with them. And then the last thing I say is just keep your focus on the mission of the church. Yes, there are going to be obstacles. Yes, we're going to get tripped up. Yes, we're going to get frustrated. But what is the mission of the church? And just put your focus back on there and just get back on after it. Okay? I mean, it's the best. People talk about, you fall off a horse. What do you get back on the horse? Listen, if there's some disappointment, frustration, I'm not saying you just pretend it's not there. No, you deal with it. But put your focus back on the church and on the mission of the church.
That's right. Amen. Along with that, and talking about just the frustrations that you have, many pastors, they admit experiencing loneliness and not finding friends, whether inside the ministry, trying to isolate themselves, or even not finding people outside of the church, worried about, can you be friends with those who are inside the church, or should you find friends outside of the church? What encouragement would you give to pastors who feel isolated and feel that sense of loneliness?
And that is tough, because I didn't do the best of jobs in finding other ministers or so to get with. There would be some individuals that I had in the church, but a lot of the younger pastors, what I've noticed is that they have got like a little network of maybe 2, 3, 4 guys that they do things together. And I've had some of them tell me about it, and I've just been so impressed with the friendship bond that they have built. And they take retreats, they do things together. Man, if 35-year-old Danny, if I'd gone back there, that's what I would have done. I would have befriended me 2 or 3 guys, either went through seminary together, or we've ministered, or had our paths cross on something. And I would greatly encourage you to do that. Younger guys are doing a great job at it. And some of you, if you're trying to think about it, that would be a great help, because they understand it, because they're in ministry, and they got your back because of your friendship. That would be the first thing I would do. And second is, I would say, feel comfortable to go to counseling. I know for us, we feel that's a sign of weakness, and we don't want anybody to know anything about it. But a good professional counselor can hear you and help to get you, I think, directed into the area you need to be. And we don't need to think that's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, of saying, I've got some things I'm dealing with and I want to get better. And I think you're maybe providing some resources for that.
Yeah, we are blessed today even to have the Alabama Baptist Christian Children's Home, as well as Pathways Christian Counseling. They are on the 3rd floor, which is where all the vendors are. And if you go to the end, close to where the coffee bar is, we have counselors who are here free of charge. It's completely confidential. And not only do they want to listen and minister and counsel and hear your struggles and your needs, but they are also so gracious that if there's ever a need that any minister has, whether it's with their children or whether it's in their own family, they will see you free of charge. And an incredible ministry that many pastors don't know exists through the gracious gifts of the Alabama Baptist Children's Home. So I would encourage you that if there's something that's been nagging at your heart and your soul and has you down, maybe the reason the Lord has you here today is to be encouraged from God's word, but also to give you an outlet, a healthy, positive outlet, that someone that wants to hear your story, that's not just going to tell you, go pray about it and it's going to get better, but it's going to give you positive Christian steps. So I would strongly encourage you to take use of the counselors who are here today. And again, they're on the 3rd floor. And again, if you need to continue to meet with them, they will meet with you as many times as you need, absolutely free. And so I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Danny, just in closing, what encouragement would you give to pastors who maybe even today are deciding whether or not they can continue on in ministry? After COVID, after finding and we're going to talk about this next. Dr. Tyshawn Garner is going to preach on this, find their identity on numbers and statistics, and they don't feel like they have any value. And we see so many in ministry now. One statistic said that less than 50% of those that begin in ministry will end in ministry. Can you just, in closing, just give a final word of encouragement to those of us here of the importance of faithfulness and who it is that we're serving? Like you said, it's not our church, but it's the Lord's church.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that, Blake. It is, I think every person here has probably thought about quitting at one time or another. And it's some difficult times that you go through, but how do you weather it? Well, I mentioned to Blake, I said, I've got a few things that I just wrote down here, and this is rapid fire. And I just hope, I think there's some wisdom in it. And if you try to do some of these things, I think it's going to help you to endure in ministry and make it to the end. Number one is to create balance. You're going to have to create a balance in your life, and that means spiritual, physical, family, and emotional. Create a balance. Don't just get all flooded over here church-wise, but I have got to have a balance. And the way you create a balance is you control your calendar. Very practical. You control your calendar. And you learn to say the word no. You got to tell some people no. And you do that by controlling your calendar. And you put the commitments there. I had a daughter that played basketball from the time she was second grade through senior in high school, and also 2 years played volleyball. And I missed 2 basketball games because of being out of town over 10 years. I was there every one of them. And he said, well, how could you do that? Put it on my calendar. And when someone called my assistant and said, hey, can you do so-and-so? It's just, he's got a commitment that day. Okay, that's easy. You put what's most important. You control your calendar. Number 2 is maintain a sustainable pace. Maintain a sustainable pace. Ask yourself the question, can I maintain this pace? What's the pace that you're running right now? Can you maintain that? You need to have a sustainable pace. And it's my belief in 30-something years of ministry, there are seasons and rhythms to where some are busier than others. And it is my recommendation that you sit down with your family when you have one of those that you look out and say, this is going to be a tough month, and I'm going to be pulled. Then you share it with your family. You let them know. You get a heads up. So I'm going to try to be as engaged as possible, but just know it's going to be a tough month. But when I finish that month, then you put in that little season of say, hey, we're taking a vacation, or I'm going to slow things down. And try to get a sustainable pace, but I do know there's going to be some ups and downs, but you need to communicate that with your family. You can run too fast, too hard, and burn out. Some say, my statement is, some say I would rather burn out than rust out. I don't want to burn out or rust out. I want to peace out. That's the way I want to go, all right? So, number 3, I've already said this, exercise. Strong body, strong mind. Exercise. Come up with something consistent. Go on and do that. Number 4, don't ever compromise your integrity. I think some people are leaving the ministry because they've compromised their integrity of some things in the past. So you compromise your integrity, your character suffers, and you lose your ability to lead. Number 5, make tough choices and be willing to be misunderstood. Make tough choices and be willing to be misunderstood. When you make tough choices, everybody's not going to understand it, and some people are not going to get it. You just know that you're going to have to sit down with some people and explain it a few times, and then maybe even be clearer in there. So in the long term, you know it's the right thing to do. This is something I'd recommend for everyone. Cultivate older people for wisdom and younger people for fresh ideas and perspective. Cultivate older people for wisdom. Find people that are older than you are that you can go to because they've got wisdom. But then at the same time, find people that are younger than you are to get fresh ideas and to get perspective. That is one of the great joys. When we did worship planning team, I love that. So you got our worship minister, and then you've got your creative group over here who, I mean, they're so far opposite at times of some things that I would think. And I enjoyed listening to their ideas and their perspective. Favorite meeting of the month. And number 7, this next one, keep short accounts and forgive others. Keep short accounts and forgive others. A part of what drags us down in ministry is that we have been hurt by people and we just hold on to that bitterness. You got to keep short accounts. You got to forgive them, and you got to move on. When you carry bitterness, it will show in your preaching. And if you're not certain, ask your wife. And start asking her about the sermons and stuff, because she's going to sit there and say, you're a little bit edgy these last few weeks over here. I say, edgy good? No, there's something that's gnawing at you. And I've been a veteran of this to know I can listen to a guy on TV, or I can go visit some church and I can look at you and say, ooh, this guy's got some bitterness. You can just tell in the preaching. But the last thing is keep your call in mind. Keep your call in mind. When I was a young pastor, I went to a conference, and Richard Lee, who had been the pastor of Rehoboth Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, outside Atlanta, Georgia, somebody asked him, young guy asked him, says, how do you endure in ministry? How do you make it to the end? And his phrase stayed with me. He says, you got to keep your call in mind. And that is, it's God that called you. Your mom, your dad, your church, nobody else called you to ministry. It was God that called you. And if God called you to ministry, when the times get difficult, what am I supposed to do? You go back and remember the call. Now, there will be some times in people's lives where God releases you from maybe that specific call and say your ministry is going to be something different. But until you get that word, always remember the call. Keep it in mind and just keep on plugging. And then you get that retirement and you get to drive away in your Honda Accord. All right? It'll be good.
Guys, how much do you appreciate Danny Wood sharing this wisdom with us today? Danny, thank you for sharing with us on short notice, but thank you for the wisdom that you shared. Thank you for the integrity, and thank you just for the example that you are to me and that you are to so many, being faithful to your calling, faithful to your family, and finishing well. So thank you for your example. Thanks for sharing with us.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you.